Hey
Okay.
Asterisks, welcome back to another episode of Ad Aster. For those just tuning in, Ad Aster is the youth-led podcast of the literary magazine Aster Lit, which focuses on cross-cultural connections within the writing world. I'm your host, Nico Kharat, an editor and podcast manager at Aster, and I want to give all of you a heartfelt welcome to episode 36, Forum and AI in Poetry. Now, let's get to know our guest, Raymond, for
Hello.
today. So, can you introduce yourself and your role in Aster Lit?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Raymond, full name Raymond Trunk. I am an associate editor here at Asterlit, and I've been here for about the same time actually as Nico has as well. So about since the beginning of last issue, which just got released, so Tesserae. And I love reading everyone's submissions to Asterlit. And in my free time, of course, I love to write, but I love learning languages. I like playing music, and I love reading. So it's lovely to be on here and to chat with you.
Great, sounds great. Today we're talking about form and poetry, and I guess I wanted to compare and talk about modern poetry, like contemporary poetry versus more archaic and traditional poetry. So the first question I had up with form is, what are some unique forms of poetry you're familiar with, and which ones are your preferred like styles of writings, like ghazals, sonnets, haiwans, etc.
I'm sure as writers, we always are reading and we encounter so many different types of poems and writing and literature. I would say some of my favorites that I've encountered, I love a good abecedarian. I think that when someone is able to like seamlessly interweave like a dissension in the alphabet, so like going from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and just like going down the alphabet and like add that into the poem, it can have a great effect, especially if it goes very seamlessly. And I would also say that I like sonnets. I like a good sonnet. I mean, I think that pretty much any form of poetry, I mean, it exists for a reason. So playing around with it and just exploring your options when it comes to form is really important. But personally, yeah, I love abecedarians. I love sonnets. I like odes. I recently came across a poetry form called like a golden shovel, which I thought was pretty cool. So there are so many different types of forms of poetry. I know most poets do use free verse, especially contemporary poets, but I think yeah, it's really cool that there are so many different types of forms that us poets can play around with and explore.
I just realized I've totally been pronouncing abecedarian wrong in my head for this whole time. I
What
was
did
saying
you
abecedarian instead of abecedarian.
wait? Because I don't know though. Is it a Becadarian?
I don't know.
Wait.
But I was
I
like,
could be I
oh,
could be wrong.
I've
I could
not
be
been
wrong.
saying it like that. But
Because I
yeah,
don't.
I agree. I really like sonnets,
Mhm.
and like traditional like poetry forms, like ghazals, for example. Like I think that's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
Especially yeah, especially like the more like traditional form of it, and like the I guess like the ancient like Arabic ghazals. Like, those
Yeah.
are so beautiful, and I love
Yes.
seeing like older poetry like that. I think the
Yeah.
form that those poets used is like they're so like good at it, and it just works like so seamlessly, and it gives the poem like such a like strong voice. And I think it's so interesting, like in like poems like that adhere to like constricted forms. Like there's like a lot of like confidence and strength in an author when they're able to like pull that off. And I think it's really interesting to see. I wanted to also talk about strength in free verse versus constricted
Yeah.
form. And like their specific characteristics, because like you said, like a lot of contemporary poets just stick to free verse instead of, like a sonnet or like a
Yeah.
ghazal, or like, which isn't like bad or anything, but I just think it's really interesting to see this trend emerge in like recent poetry as compared to traditional poetry in the past, which has just been like the greats were more inclined to use constricted form over free verse.
Yeah. I think it's pretty cool that now, like as writers, I mean, in the past, poetry used to kind of be confined very specifically to different types of form. But now, I mean, there is like the creative liberty of being able to get published with poems that have really any sort of experimental or creative characteristics, free verse, or adhere to any sort of structure, or even when people play around with existing structures and make new things out of it. I think it's really cool. But to answer your question, yeah, or to talk about what you brought up, yeah, I mean, free verse is very predominant. Like, I think a lot of poets, there are a lot of people that write who have actually never even like experimented with anything else other than free verse, which is totally fine. But I do think when we think of poetry, like especially what we see written online, there's a lot more of like openness and openness with the form and the structure. I would say that with free verse, I think there's a lot more availability for expression with the form. You can kind of play around with what you're saying, and you don't have to worry about constricting your words into a particular format. So you like if you want to express something in a particular way or use a particular word or phrasing, you don't have to worry about constricting it into a particular like a tip like the amount of beats or like iambic pentameter or like you don't have to put it in a specific way. You can kind of express yourself more freely and there's more opportunity to like play around with your word choice and your structure. Um, but I would say also within that, you do have to kind of find ways to get creative because when you have so many options, it's very easy to fall into the cliches where you can kind of just start writing about very similar things. And with poems, like you said, like non-free verse poems, so poems that have particular structures and formats, of course, it is going to be harder to actually convey what you want to express within that. But I think it's a challenge that a lot of poets, especially if you're just beginning writing, I encourage you to take that leap and start like learning how to write with those different types of formats as well. Because when you write with free verse, you kind of just get used to the same beat of poetry in the way that you write and the way that your structure goes around. But if you're forced to re-examine that with a different already like set type of structure, like let's say I don't know, like a sonnet, and you have to write 14 lines in a very particular couplet way. I think that, or like you have to use like a Shakespearean rhyme scheme. So like, of course, it could be more difficult to express what you want to express, but it can also force you to find pretty creative and interesting ways to convey what you're saying within that space. So you might find things that you never even thought of using to convey your the thesis of your poem when you use particular structures like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about it. That free verse kind of like I don't know, allows poets to like almost be redundant with their writing, not in like a bad way, but sometimes thematically the ideas can get mixed up and it's just like the same
Yeah,
poem like a million times. I thought that was a really interesting point, and how a more structured form allows the poet to think more diversely and bring new ideas to the table. Definitely for sure. Like that was something I hadn't even considered
yeah,
in free verse versus like structured form, especially the point about contemporary poets. Like, yeah, like you said, like there's a lot more availability to publish and to push their work out. And I think also it is, I feel like the shift into contemporary poetry has kind of encouraged poets to like, I don't know, when I'm editing, I always have to think about whether to kill my darlings or like keep a line in or like something like that. And structured poetry really forces you to think about that. So you're left with a poem that is like, it's what you want to say. Like there's no
right.
unnecessary image or unnecessary figurative language that you just wanted to keep in because like like that's your baby, like you wrote it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
yeah, like I struggle with like killing my darlings, and I think like one time my friend like edited my work and she was like, wow, like I feel like you really need to cut this, but I would really struggle to cut this because it's really good. Like I could never kill my darlings if they were that good. And I keep thinking about that. I'm like that's such a struggle that so many modern poets and writers have, I feel, because they'll
yeah,
have such beautiful images or like one-liners or sections of their poem, but it ultimately doesn't add to the overall like form or the overall like poem.
yeah,
And it's just like and it really hurts because you're like this poem would be really good and I really like this image separately, but it doesn't work in the context of this. And I think definitely structured form like forces you to really think about that and process that, and you end up with a poem that is more finished and more tight thematically than free verse I think allows. So I think that's definitely like a comparison there. But at the same time,
yeah,
like free verse allows you to really push that creativity and add those images in, really create your own voice. So I think it's just a really interesting discussion to have, and I feel like that's also why a lot of more like vetted poets tend to like eventually they seg into form in poetry, like structured poetry, instead of like a lot of more beginner authors, kind of like you said, like a lot of them write about the same things, and just it's free verse. There's a very like I don't know, culture and trend going on. Free verse contemporary poets that kind of just say a lot of things and they don't have the most like tight poems to publish. So
right.
I think that's a really interesting discussion to have. Yeah.
Based on what you said, I struggle with the same thing, like killing your darlings. Like I will write things and then I think it adds like because when you're writing, you think what you're putting on the paper would make it makes so much sense to you that sometimes it's hard to realize that like to someone else, even if it's written very well, sometimes it doesn't really add a cohesive image up, or it can like detract from the actual core meaning of the poem. So yeah, I think structure really forces you to, like you said, relook at it. And like I kind of going off of what you said about like free verse giving you so much creativity and like having these lines that you love, but it's hard to cut them off because there's no like structural limits that force you to reconsider adding certain lines. I used to do this thing when I started writing where I had like a notes app list of all these lines that I wrote, and I would like try to include like all the lines and make it into one poem. And yeah, maybe the lines on themselves were pretty good, but when you add them all together and it just you need, I think with free verse, it's very easy to fall into the trap of like just writing so many like lines and like things like you think that it makes so much sense as like a poem, but really it's some of it's superfluous or some of it just like doesn't really flow in the way that it should be. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess a seg into the next question I had ready was what are some poems that we feel like utilize form well and their specific characteristics? I wanted to share mine real quick.
oh yeah, for
Because
sure.
I picked two. I picked one that was a sonnet and then I picked one that was like a contemporary poem. So give me a second. I want to share my screen.
Cool, okay.
So the first poem that I had up was like a Shakespearean sonnet. I guess
Oh
I'll
cool.
read it for the podcast listeners. Not from the stars do I my judgment pluck, and yet methinks I have astronomy, but not to tell of good or evil luck, of plagues, of dearths, or seasons' quality. Nor can I fortune to brief minutes tell, pointing to each his thunder, rain, and wind, or say with princes if it shall go well, by oft predict that I in heaven find. But from thine eyes my knowledge I derive, and constant stars in them I read such art, as truth and beauty shall together thrive, if from thyself to store thou wouldst convert. Or else of thee this I prognosticate, thy end is truth and beauty's doom and date. I really like this poem. It's Sonnet 14
Oh,
by
cool.
Shakespeare. I really liked it because I feel like it's very tight thematically. Like, I don't know, like each line has such a good like cadence and rhythm to it. And I thought it was really like I don't know, it's fun to read. It's fun to say out loud. Like while I was reading it just now, I was like, oh, like that has like a beat to it. And
Yeah,
rhyme is like, it's like it's I really value like in my writing recently, I feel like as I've matured as a poet, I start to care about more like the meter and the way that the like words
yeah,
flow
yeah.
together. And I didn't care about that much when I was starting to like begin writing.
Mhm.
But I feel like that's become more important to me as of recent. And I feel like this poem specifically has just like a really good cadence, and Shakespeare is really good overall with
Yeah,
having a kind of like that meter and musicality to his poems. Like that's what he's like, that's his thing.
yeah,
And you can tell that it's like it's sharp, it's edited well. And I thought that was a really good example of like a sonnet. And
yeah.
the other example that I had was this poem called The Special Hour at the Casa Azul Restaurant y Cantina. I don't speak Spanish, so I might say these words wrong, but it's by Jose Oliveras. Despecho rhymes with espejo. Translation, my sibs could be my twins if they weren't so feos. Remix, if I weren't so ugly, I wouldn't look so much like mis hermanos. Let me try again. This one goes out to my fam, posted at the bar, pouring shots until the ceiling falls apart and reveals the moon. I'm sorry to break the news. You can sing all you want, comadre. You can get Chente himself to sing on your behalf. She's gone. Translation. All there's left to do, llorar y llorar. One more time for those who haven't caught on. It's that time of night where all you have is your biggest ache and all its nicknames. Our bartender is from Guatemala. He tells us Spanish is his second language. His first language is Ixil. In the entire state of Iowa, how many people speak Ixil? Question: is Despecho the music he plays when he cleans the drunks up from the bar? And is Despecho what it sounds like when you cross one strange country just to land in another and discover all your words for love are strange and unfamiliar? I read this in my AP Lit class and I really, really liked it. We had to do like a timed discussion on it. It was really interesting. But I think this is a really strong example of a contemporary poet like doing free verse really well. I feel like this poem would have been held back if it had to conform to like a structure. like I don't know, it flows very well in the free verse form, and you can see that Oliveras clearly took the like creative liberties in order to further like advance the themes and the musicality of the poem. Like a
Yeah,
lot of poets contemporary don't take musicality into consideration when they do free verse, but I feel like Oliveras really, I don't know, with the enjambments here, I feel like they're really, really well done. Like, I don't know, it's just so, it's punchy, it's great. Thematically, it's really tight. And I really like this end sentence here, like when it's the last like four lines, because again, the enchantment is like wonderful. I feel like he uses every aspect of a free verse poem like really well. Like the rhyme scheme is kind of there, but like again, it's like a loose rhyme. Like it's just like it's
yeah,
to, enhance the musicality. The stanzas are just there where he wants them to be, and each section is like very like clear what the purpose of each stanza is. I guess those were the two poems I wanted to share that I thought did like their respective like contemporary versus like structured form really well. So
yeah. No, I agree. I think like when you start writing, this is kind of going back to the thing with the Shakespearean sonnet that you shared. I think like a lot of times like to sound more like mature as poets, I think we stray away from rhyming because it's seen as like when someone thinks of a poem, one of the first things they usually think of if they're not really familiar with poetry is like maybe like a roses are red, violets are blue sort of situation, right? Where it's like a pretty simple rhyme scheme. So I think that the natural inclination to kind of sound more like sophisticated would be to stray away from that. But I think that there's a reason why rhyme is included in poetry and why it's almost synonymous with it, because the musicality of the verse, because poetry in and of itself is like a lyrical art form. So of course, like things like rhyming, like the musicality of it are very, very important. Kind of similar to you, in like a class I had, I would think I was reading the earliest of English poetry. It was like an English classics class. And I mean, yeah, like if you think about it, poetry as an art form was for the longest time was never written down. It was spoken. People gathered around to listen to it. So it was a communal sort of thing where you would listen in and you would be driven by the musicality of the verse and how the words kind of connected to each other. And that was a lot of the appeal of it. So I think that in that way, like rhyming and having some sort of structure to your poem can really help. But of course, like you said, like with that poem that you shared, the free verse poem, it's just kind of about finding your own different ways to express that musicality and finding your own ways, if that's free verse or if that's some sort of poetic structure, whatever works for you, experimenting with those and like finding ways to express it, that core essence that what makes poetry poetry, which is having that emotionally dense and musically rich language. So if you want, I can also share what I.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Let me do this sonnet. It's by Rina Espaillat. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's called Butchering. So this is a sonnet that I read recently, and I really liked it. I don't think I can share it on my screen because I'm on my iPad right now, but I can just read it aloud. My mother's mother, toughened by the farm, hardened by infants' burials, used a knife and swung an axe as if her woman's arm wielded a man's hard will. Inured to life and death alike, what ails you now, she'd say, ungently to the sick. She fed them, too, roughly but well, and took the blood away, and washed the dead, if there was that to do. She told us children how the cows would sense, how the cows could sense when their own calves were marked for butchering, and how they load their wordless eloquence impossible to still with anything. Sweet Clover or her unremitting care, she told it simply, but she faltered there. I really like, I think it's refreshing to read like a contemporary poem that makes use of like a rhyme scheme almost. And I think that the way Espaillat did it was very ingenious, just kind of like you almost don't realize at points it's rhyming, but then there's like this undeniable, like you said, musicality to it that I think is really cool. So yeah, I just think that moral of the story, more poets should rhyme. So that's but not, of course not just that, but yeah.
No, yeah, I think rhyming is like really like important in poems. Especially just like basic like figurative language things too. Like I really like seeing rhymes and like a well done like alliteration. I feel like it just adds like a little like pizzazz to the
Yeah,
poem. Like,
yeah, yeah, no, I
it
got what
just
you mean.
makes it seem like a little more fun. Okay, I feel like we kind of answered like form and like themes. So
Yeah,
we can go on to the next question. How does contemporary poetry differ from like archaic poetry in terms of form? And do you think contemporary poets should pay more attention to form? I feel like we've kind of discussed this, but I feel like we can go into more depth here.
Okay.
I guess someone I wanted to bring up was maybe Rupi Kaur, because
Okay.
she's a very renowned like free verse poet, but I feel like a lot of people have very polarizing opinions of her. Like I feel like people in like the general like public, they'll think like, oh, like she's a poet, like she's I feel like I've like heard of her work before, but a lot of the poets that I've talked to are like Rupi Kaur. We have like personal beef because she kind of popularized the Insta poet format, and I guess I wouldn't say that she like diminished the more structure based like more mature poets of our time, but she definitely put an image onto like contemporary poetry that a lot of people have dividing opinions about. So
Yeah.
I think she might just be interesting to maybe discuss in this episode,
Oh, yeah, we
because
can
of her
talk about it.
relevance in like instant poetry form or like short free verse.
Yeah, I mean the beef people have with her is serious. Like people do not like her. If you're asking like my thoughts on all of that, I think that it's pretty nuanced. Like I think of course, like when you read a Rupi Kaur poem, a lot of it kind of feels like you're reading like a motivational quote that's separated by enchantment. But other time, I feel like it's undeniable. I mean, so many people, what Milk and Honey was her debut book or her most popular one at least. People were obsessed with that. Like my friend who doesn't read poetry, she told me, I think I was talking about Rupi Kaur to her, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I read that book," and like she liked it. And I was at like a open mic workshop the other day, and someone brought up Rupi Kaur as one of their favorite poets, and people were agreeing with her. And I think it's an interesting discussion because in these sort of like insular communities, we kind of like have this prevailing belief that some forms of poetry are like superior. And in a way, yeah, like I mean, some of her poems just kind of feel like glorified quotes if you look at them. Like I mean, or like it's just like two two or three words together that just kind of like don't really make too much sense. But she introduced poetry to so many people that or she made it kind of mainstream that you can look at it in two ways. I think you can look at it as her diminishing the form of poetry, like how she encouraged people to kind of write off like very simple quotes or aphorisms that are just spaced in the correct way as poems. Or you can look at it as her encouraging more people who would have never even considered writing poetry to think of their own work as being valuable to share. I don't know. I mean, I personally am not the biggest fan of her work. Like, I wouldn't sit down and buy Milk and Honey and read it and feel enlightened by Milk and Honey. But I think that there is some merit to it, and I think that yeah.
No, I definitely agree.
Oh
So we
yeah,
could
it's,
definitely talk about our last question.
for sure.
It like I think it bounces right off what you were saying. I had written down, where do you see contemporary poets going in the future form-wise? Will free verse still trend or will another form emerge? Like, what do you think about poetry's future?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think that free verse is probably going to be the predominant form of poetry for a lot of younger contemporary authors. I mean, who am I to say really? I mean, I have no idea what the future can hold, but I mean, I think most people are most comfortable with free verse, and I think it's cool that people have that ability to experiment so deeply. There's so many free verse poems out there being written that I think that I actually have noticed too, like a trend, I think, within like the teen writing community. Like a lot of people are writing like ghazals and abecedarians, however you want to say it, or they're writing like even like haikus or like kind of sonnets and like playing around with that sort of experimentation. So I could definitely see that kind of being on the rise, with free verse being kind of like the dominant way that people communicated their emotions through poetry for so long. I think that people might want to take a return to the structured form, but I don't really see people writing like Shakespearean sonnets and writing like epic poems anymore. Like I think the days of like Beowulf and Paradise Lost are maybe before us, but I will say that I think that people are gonna maybe, hopefully, perhaps experiment as they have been like with existing forms of poetry and push those boundaries and take it to places that it really hasn't been seen before. So,
I mean, who's to say we won't get another Odyssey in our lifetime? Someone could
yeah,
definitely sit down and write that.
yeah. No, literally, like, what if someone just wrote an epic poem?
Yeah,
Like,
it's just
actually,
like
you
an
know what?
epic
Let's bring it
poem.
back. Let's bring epics back.
Yeah.
Come on.
Um, but yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I don't think structured poetry is gonna like die anytime soon. Because again, like, I don't know. I feel like it's a supply demand graph. Like all of these publications are getting free verse poetry. It's just a free verse poem, another free verse poem. Like you get all
Yeah.
these free verse poems. So I feel like somebody who can like really pull off a structured poem, like a sonnet or like a ghazal. Like ghazals are hard to write. Like I tried to write one this summer. I did okay. It was
Well,
all right, but I sat down and I was like, this is actually like so hard. But I
yeah,
definitely think
yeah,
that like those who can like really pull those forms off, like I think they'll definitely like get their star moment in the future.
for
As like
sure.
publications are getting like so many like free verse poems, it's gonna be like really cool to see like these standout poets who can like succeed in like pulling off these very difficult forms. So yeah, like I definitely think that'll like something like that will happen. But yeah, I think free
Yeah,
verses are like our cultural like poetry defining thing. So yeah, for sure.
yeah. Something I did want to bring up though is that another form of poetry that we didn't really talk about here, but that I did kind of want to touch on are contrapuntals because I think they are so hard to write
Oh my
well,
God,
but
they're so bad.
but when
I can't
when
do
they're
it.
done well, it's so good. Like for those listeners who aren't familiar with contrapuntals, it's basically like there's like two kind of like segments of the poem, and you can read it in different directions. So you can read it vertically, you can read them together, you can read them as like two separate things. Like, oh my God, I tried writing one like last year or something.
I
I don't know.
tried writing one and I gave up. I was like, I can't
It's
do
so
this.
hard. It's literally like the hard, like I forgot to bring it up. That's like for me, that's like the hardest type of poetry that
Mhm.
like I think I've personally tried to write. And like I think it's so hard because the structure requires it to be like have meaning in so many different ways. But that's the thing, like I think structure can be hard to pull off, but it can also be so rewarding. Like if someone writes a good contrapuntal, and let's say we're reviewing submissions for like an Asterlit issue, right? And someone submits like a really good contrapuntal, and like it just makes so much sense, and the meaning is so layered. I think that it's like it stands out to you because there's already the existing like challenge of the form, and then you're able to like interweave through that and like find a cool way to express it through that form. I think that's really impressive to me. But otherwise, sometimes people write contrapuntals because they just want to write a contrapuntal, right? Or they'll write a sonnet just because they want to write a sonnet. And then that form constricts them because they're not writing it, they're just writing a poem to fit that structure and not because the message of that poem actually fits within that structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree.
I know
But
we have a whole
this
second.
was a really fun segment. I really enjoyed talking
Yeah.
about this. And we discussed a lot of interesting things, such as like, I guess the free verse versus like foreign poetry. We brought a lot of interesting discussions to the table. So yeah, thank you so much
Yes, of
for
course.
joining me today, Raymond. Okay, so welcome to our second segment, with Chelsea. Chelsea, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Asterisks. I'm Chelsea, and I'm really excited to be talking on the podcast today.
So for the second segment we're discussing AI in creative writing and writing in general. Since that's a pretty hot topic as of late, the first question that I had up for us to discuss was how has AI been affecting creative writing and writing in general?
Recently, obviously, AI has these capabilities to write these on the surface level, these pretty proficient essays, but I would say that I, as a creative writer, really strongly believe that AI is unable to replace creative writing in any way, shape, or form. I think that AI ultimately lacks like that human flavor that it's just unable to produce. A lot of what it produces is just regurgitated off of the data that it's been fed. It's like a compilation of all of the most famous writers out there that although I would say that it does write pretty proficient like school essays. And regarding school essays, I see the impact of AI a lot more on school essays because I think in general, most creative writers won't rely on AI to write their creative writing because as a creative writer, you like it's not just the actual writing, but it's the pursuit of writing and the act of writing that matters a lot more. But in school essays, I would say that I think AI has led to a general decrease in the quality of like writing school essays on a whole because we rely on it so much now. I think cheating with school essays using AI is a huge problem, and I think that unfortunately AI has managed to imitate pretty well some of like the aspects of school essays since it's like a really standardized format. I would say that a lot of my teachers will say that, oh, I can tell, but I can say that some of my classmates have submitted AI essays and they have not been able to tell. So, yeah.
Okay, I think that's a pretty interesting point about like school essays. I will say that a particular field in which I feel like AI has been pretty rampant in is college essays. Since I've been like as a senior, I've submitted all of my essays. Are you a senior also?
Oh, I'm a junior right now, but
Okay. Yeah, but like be wary because so many of the college essays that I've read or seen like examples of online, it's just like AI, and I'm like, you use like way too many, like you use the M dash way too much and way too like incorrectly. Like that's like you put that in a chat GPT. But yeah, I feel like as a whole, that's just made these like spaces for like like school essays or like college admissions, like these spaces where like AI is specifically used for these kinds of essays or writing. It's made it so that like it's so saturated that you can't really tell like when someone uses it versus someone doesn't use it because so much of the style is like expected to fall into like a certain category. Like for example, like college essays, like because you have like a 600-ish word limit, so you're gonna be using those you M dashes, those like colons, and it's become like kind of embedded in the style, and AI is pretty easily able to like pick those up. So it's like it's unfortunate, but I feel like in those spaces specifically, AI is kind of like it's succeeding in like replicating real essays and real creative thinking, which I think is pretty unfortunate because especially in college essays, like that's where you're supposed to be yourself and be authentic, and AI is just completely like preventing that. And it's really disappointing to see. And I also think that in like larger industry spaces, like we were discussing in more like smaller scale like educational spaces, but in like larger scale like industry spaces, for example, I'm pretty sure like I encountered this like AI written book the other day, or people were talking about it on social media. Like it was a whole book generated by AI, and I was like, there's no way they just like let that slide. But specifically in like contemporary like novel spaces or like writing, I feel like since that style is so predominant and like there's a specific way that these writers write, so AI is able to like pick that up really fast, which just makes it really like disappointing. Like you have these cultural markers and these like contemporary creative writing markers, and AI is just able to just take it, like you said, just take real authors' work and just recycle it and spit it back out. Which is just unfortunate to see. So, okay, for my second question up, I had how does AI affect poetry specifically? What are some tells, and what does it take away from a human written poem?
I think that, well, you've done like an amazing job talking about like the college essays. I can say that for me as a junior, I see a lot of AI use in AP, believe it or not, like writing those AP essays. But for poetry specifically, I think that the biggest impact of AI on poetry, I wouldn't say is actually using AI to write poetry because I think that's very easy to tell if it's AI. I think that is something that you can pick up immediately. But I would say overall, in that writers will begin to like pursue after this originality. Like, how can I make my work so wildly different, so wildly like obviously not influenced by like AI or computers? And I think that will create like a general trend in poetry towards more like abstract ideas, a bit more like maybe not so grounded, maybe the forms are going to get a little wilder, etc. But definitely, I think that it will create this pursuit, not just in poetry, but just overall in writing, in college essays, in fiction, of this idea of being myself, like being so original, being so unique that there's just no possible way someone could question you that you could ever have used AI. Because I think that's what a lot of writers are facing nowadays, even as students. You can write a brilliant essay you spent time on, and you're faced with the question your teachers are going to ask you, did you use AI? And I think that's a very discouraging and it's a humbling question. All it's going to create is this pursuit of, oh, I need to prove that I have this creative, that I'm a creative writer. I need to prove that my ideas are absolutely original. I'm really interested to see how that will impact the creative writing space.
I definitely agree. It's really interesting because me and Raymond were talking about this in the last segment about
Mhm.
how creative writing, especially poetry, has gotten like so like saturated by like the same kind of form or whatever, like the same like themes and motifs. And I feel like it's pretty similar to like how AI is gonna like impact creative writing spaces because AI is just gonna spit out the same kinds of poems and the same like styles of poetry. And you're right, like as a reaction to that, I think the creative writing space will definitely get a lot more like abstract, contemporary all of these like postmodern like art forums. And I definitely think that it'll be pretty interesting to see the way that people approach that, especially creative writers and like magazine editors, because we don't want to publish like an AI generated poem, so we're gonna be looking for the more like unique poetry forms and like abstract poems in general. Because again, like that's proof like you didn't publish like AI. Um, and I also think that AI written poetry, like, I don't know, poetry as an art form is just so deeply rooted in like self-expression. Like that's the point of poetry. So it's really, I feel like it's quite telling when a poem is written from in like ChatGPT or like a large language model or anything, because it doesn't feel like authentic almost. Like it has this weird like I don't know, there's a lot of analyses on how AI it kind of just abuses like figurative language and interesting syntax. Like it'll say things that don't really make sense. Like it uses the word quiet a lot and it uses a lot of these like strange sentence structures that I feel are pretty obvious when you're reading poetry and you're just like that doesn't make sense. Like that literally like that's something generated. So I think that's like one of the most obvious tells. And it's interesting to see how abstract that people are going to be able to push that like as the industry goes on for sure. And I guess bouncing off of that, my next question was specifically in like the teen writing industry, like how have you seen AI like seep into these spaces?
Well, I would say that, like, obviously, we as a lit mag, I think we've received a few poems that were AI generated, and it was quite easy to tell. I'd say overall, though, I don't think AI has really impacted like heavily the teen writer industry because I think most people are, again, creative writing, like you said, is rooted in self-expression. I don't think a lot of creative writers, if you actually enjoy creative writing, will gravitate towards these computer modules. But I would say that AI definitely has a hand in brainstorming. And I think a lot of writers, if they're out of ideas, they might go to AI to generate prompts. I've never done that before, but I think some people definitely do that, or use AI to generate titles. And I think what this ends up doing is a lot of the times I think that it creates like writing with similar themes. Like, I'd say that if you were to ask AI to generate a prompt for you, it will just take off data that you see on the website or like on the internet or whatever, and then I think it creates like, especially if you are gravitating towards like a specific theme, like you're asking AI, how do I write about, like, give me prompts that are related to nature. I think it's going to give a lot of ideas that have been discussed before. And what ends up happening is I think a lot of poems, even if creatively written, may just come off sounding like, oh, this is familiar. We've discussed this before. And I think that's like the impact of AI on like the teen space, especially when people are out of ideas or just need some inspo.
I especially like what you said about things being like, or like AI generating very like similar themes. I think already the teen writing space is almost like, I wouldn't call it like an echo chamber, but a lot of us like know each other and a lot of us are exposed to the same magazines, competitions, environments, which leads to a lot of ideas being like, thrown around, bounced around a lot. People taking inspiration off of each other, like after poems, like people, borrowing maybe images from each other which I think leads to already like a lot of like echo chamber like aspects or a space where everyone is kind of communicating with each other. Their poems are in conversation. It's very like you can tell like oh this person took inspiration from this person or like this poem feels really familiar. Maybe I've seen it in this like teen magazine or whatever. So I think that's already like kind of like a bit of a problem in the teen writing space. A lot of people just rely on their peers to come up with ideas and themes instead of figuring it out themselves. And I think the addition of AI into that space would just cause even more of that like bubble, like echo chamber, like status for the teen writing sphere because like again like you said like it's going to come up with the same patterns and I saw like a podcast on this the other day but this guy was saying like AI almost like predicts these trends, but then people feed into it because AI is so in like our collective conscience. Like AI will generate like a predicted trend or something, or it'll be like a loud minority of people talking about a specific pattern or trend, and then AI will look at that pattern and assume everyone is also interested in it. And then people who are engaging with AI will look at the AI telling them, oh, everyone is into this, and then they'll actually be into it. And it becomes this kind of cycle of like a false algorithm almost of things becoming popular. And I think that's like a really interesting aspect to maybe apply to teen writing, especially with like themes, like I guess topics that people write about, stylistic choices, things like that. And I guess off of that also, the teen writing sphere has like young arts and scholastic and all of these different kinds of competitions very visible in our like daily lives. So I was wondering how would AI, like how have you seen AI impact these competitions? And like how do you think that these organizations are working against it?
So one thing I've definitely noticed is these like after you're doing submissions, now that a lot of these competitions have included the clause of like I by checking this box off, I am affirming that I haven't used any AI in any of my resources. It becomes like it's become a contract now, like a promise you have to give. And I think that I'm not sure what the consequences would be if they discovered you used AI, but I think by just including that clause in a lot of their submission forms, it's communicating to writers that there's a consequence of using AI and we don't appreciate that use of AI. And I think when a lot of these like widely acknowledged or notable or prestigious like organizations and competitions are just by adding that clause, it's discouraging, sorry, teen writers that like like these big organizations don't approve of AI and I shouldn't be using AI and there are consequences of using AI. And I think that's one way that they're trying to combat it. I also noticed that there have been some like some have even included like their own AI policy besides just like a clause and it's like discussing like AI's use in like every part of the writing process from brainstorming down to editing down to drafting and like I think that's also a really good way to combat like the use of an AI like in a harmful way within the creative writing space. I don't think it's good to not talk about it. I think it's really good that we're discussing and these competitions and these organizations are immediately like stepping in and addressing the issue rather than just kind of letting it ferment in like the corner for a while.
For sure. And as you said, like you don't really know the consequences, but I'm pretty sure that if you win like a scholastic scholarship, I think later on, like when they like actually talk to you about it, they're like, "Oh, like ha can you confirm that all of this work is original, or else you can tell us now and we won't revoke your award, but if you don't tell us, we'll take your scholarship away." So I think that's a pretty good like threat, especially for bigger like hefty scholarships like Scholastic, like the I think the gold medals portfolios have like a 2,000 for silver and then like a 12,000 for gold, which is like a lot of money. And for that to be like taken away, like if they find out that you used AI to like write your thing, like that's a pretty big consequence. And I feel like definitely it'll discourage like those more serious writers from like away from using AI. So definitely like I do see like these bigger like organizations and industries like pushing away from AI and like making sure that like the next generation of writers understand that it's like wrong to be using this for your creative work and passing it off to get like money and awards and stuff like that because you're just like deceiving the arts community if you're doing that. So I think definitely there's like a shift when it comes to like these competitions. As for like the submissions themselves, so sometimes I do see scholastic pieces getting awards, even if they're like AI generated. Like I've seen like art pieces and things like that,
Yeah.
and like some poems, and it's really disheartening to see because I'm like I can tell like that's like you like just use ChatGPT for that. It's really disheartening because like why couldn't the judge tell this? Like I can tell this.
Yeah.
Um, and I definitely think it's also like an effect of the like these competitions are becoming commodified almost. I mean, there were always commodities, but with this rise of college applications being like so incredibly competitive, there's a lot more of like a desire for teen writers to get these awards, like no matter what it takes, and just put it on their applications so that they can like go to college. But I think ultimately that's just like I don't know. I feel like the writing industry has become kind of a pressure cooker as of late because of all of this intense pressure, like the job market is kind of bad. Like there's
Mhm.
no like room for the arts to like really thrive in times like these unless you're like a standout. Like you have to have that grit to get what it takes to make it really big. Like these like big name off authors like Richard Steichen. Like everyone knows Richard Steichen, Ocean Vuong. Everyone knows Ocean Vuong. So it's like one in a million chance that you become that author that's super well known, famous, who actually makes money and like a living off of their work. So young writers as of recent have like this pressure cooker and AI being introduced into this sphere, especially these competitions. It's just become like I don't know, it's less about the actual arts themselves, about how willing you are to use AI, do whatever it takes to get the gold medal or get like this young arts winner with distinction. And I just feel like it's very detrimental. Like already we have a system that's kind of broken, and then AI comes in into these competitions and it just makes it worse in my opinion. So I don't know, but I'm really glad that these organizations are taking real measures and real consequences to prevent that like shift from happening from this industry to like blow up on itself. Like Scholastic, for example, with the scholarships I mentioned. But
I really
um
resonate with that actually because, like, sorry to cut you off, but like I was just saying, like, when you said that, like, it's becoming like a pressure cooker and like people are, it's like commodified. I really resonate with that. I've seen it. Like, a lot of the times now, it's become like, oh, what can I do to make my passion, what might have started as a passion, into this like shining new metal that I can decorate on my resume, this another flower that I could put on this dress I'm planning on wearing when I apply for colleges and I dance for them and perform for them. Like, I feel like that's like a really big part. And one way I've noticed AI, like I just thought of it, like actually seep into writing is the artist statements. For Scholastic, like the artist statements, the writer statements, your, I would say biographies, but definitely like the statements. Like, why did I write this? Why did I draw this? I think I've noticed a lot of AI using that because it's not as like the consequences aren't as big if you were to use AI on that kind of statement. It saves time, and I think time is really essential for a lot of writers. You want to write a lot, you want to get a lot of work out there. You don't want to write a separate writer statement for every single piece you submit according to the contest deadlines. So I'm noticing like in general, a lot of artist statements start to sound really similar, and like obviously with the patterns of like ChatGPT, and I think that's where I'm seeing AI's impact.
No, yeah, for sure. And it's like I don't know, you said something about saving time and time is of the essence. Like that's so real. Like there's so much to do all the time, especially if you're like a junior or senior in high school. Like I remember junior year was like hell. Like I was I was
Is it right
actually
now?
stressed out of my mind. And that was when I was applying to like Scholastic, Young Arts, like these big name competitions, some other stuff too. And I was just like get me out. Like I'm trying to save as much time as possible. I didn't use AI in my statements, but I could definitely like I condemn AI, but I could definitely see why people would like go that far because it's just so much stress upon like a young writer and you just want to like get those things done. You have so much other stuff to do. And college applications do not help that like in the least. But I guess I don't know, for any listeners out there, like I will say that I won my awards without using AI. Like I like did like my Scholastic and my Young Art stuff. Like that was all like without AI. And my college application too. Like all of my extracurriculars, all of my things were done without AI. I did not rely on AI for those, and I think I still ended up pretty successful in my writing career and my like going into college career. So I think it's like more important to be authentic in your writing and in your like college application, in your like awards that you want to win writing wise. It's way more important to be authentic than to have like a completely perfect streamlined piece because I think the judges and the people involved in these competitions will definitely see the like heart and the effort that comes from, you know, like a writer's personality and their like actual like artistic drive rather than they want to see something completely perfect and amazing. So for all the like listeners out there, you guys should maybe think about that if you ever consider using AI in the future because authenticity is more important than perfection. And I guess that brings us to the last question I had written down. What could push a young writer to rely on AI, and how should we combat this urge almost? I feel like we've discussed this a little bit, but we can go like more like in depth over here.
Yeah, I think like obviously we've talked about like time, saving, like, you know, saving effort. I think maybe another big reason why like some people will go into AI, and I see this a lot with like school essays. Some people like aren't confident in their writing, and they truly believe that like maybe with the help of AI, it will become better. Because again, like we're all aware that what we AI does is it takes like probably the data and the writing pieces from like the greats of writing or like really famous pieces because that's what they can find the easiest on the internet, and then it regurgitates that into its own form. And I think some people might be thinking, oh, like if it's regurgitating that data, then it's good, then it's able to like help my writing or improve it. And I think in a lot of like especially in school environments, I think that AI use stems from like a very big like this area of insecurity where you feel like, oh, I can't write better than AI, and yet I still need those grades and I still need that like recognition, so I'm just going to use it and hope that it can get me far. And I think a big way to combat against this is, well, especially within schools, I think that I've noticed a lot of schools implement in-class writing, but I still don't think that's very helpful because I have seen people cheat with in-class writing assignments anyway. I've seen that Gemini in the background on, propped up against their computer. Like, so I feel like a big way to like reduce AI use is kind of to combat like the core, which is that insecurity that like, oh, I can't like do well enough without it. And I think that stems from like this overinflation of first grades, but also just within the teen writing industry too, like recognition. I'm not really sure how you could like prevent this overinflation, especially with how competitive it is now and like everyone's urge to really like stand out so it's easier to get ahead in like life or whatnot. But I think that that is the core of the issue. And maybe if we as a society could like step back a little and start recognizing that it's not just about like the achievements but like the process, and if we were to focus on the process a little more, I really do think that we would all be more successful and we would all grow more as people.
Mhm. Definitely. And I had this conversation in my English class the other day. My teacher was asking us, like, you guys, I've seen this like trend recently where you guys don't raise your hand in class despite having time to discuss the question I've just asked with your neighbors or people around you. And then we reached the conclusion that like people are scared of being wrong. Especially like in our post-COVID like these high school seniors and juniors happening. Like I don't know, like I was in like I was 12 when COVID happened. I feel like after that, ever since then, it's just been like really hard to be wrong in class. Because I don't know, I feel like a lot of people lost confidence over that time. And alongside that, it's just been like really hard, like academically, to get back on track after this global tragedy that happened. No one's confident in themselves anymore, in academic environments. And like you said, like that just leads like this insecurity just leads to people like cheating on their writing and thinking like I can never be better than AI. But like the problem is that people are scared of being wrong these days. Like it's okay to be wrong. And I feel like in our like recent culture, maybe we've made it not okay to be wrong, especially like I was talking about earlier with these competitions and these awards that people want to win and the college application stress and how competitive it is. Like nobody can like afford to be wrong almost anymore because everybody needs to like get the best award, get the best situation. So everyone relies on like AI instead to do the work for them because they just can't stand being wrong and they don't get the chance to be wrong safely either. Because I feel like for writing especially in like the teen writing about how people just like submit things to magazines and then get rejected and they feel pretty bad about it and there's almost like no safe way to feel wrong without like hurting like or feeling bad about themselves like it's almost as people see writing as a reflection on their character almost about like you can't be wrong or else you're like a failure and that's just I feel like that's just not true like we should be able to give these writers spaces in order to be wrong and not face any like bad negative consequences about it. And realize like, oh, it's fine to be wrong. I'll just do better next time. I'll learn from these mistakes and I'll implement that in my writing. But yeah, I feel like we've just run out of those spaces where it's okay to be wrong. And I feel like as a like I don't know, as I graduate, I plan on going into like maybe something school related in my college, like writing wise. I definitely want to be able to help make these like institutional changes in these like communities for writers. I think that's a pretty like if everyone was involved in that, then we would have a really robust community of like young writers and who aren't afraid to fail, then get back up afterwards. So I think that's definitely a step we should like take.
I
Um,
think that's really Sorry, I keep like cutting you off, but I just want to say I think that's really inspirational and I think it's amazing that's what you aspire to do. I find that like so uplifting and that's an awesome message to spread to other people. I think that's like great. Like I'd be so excited to see where you go and how far that takes you. Oh, and also kind of just connecting back to what you said that like we don't really have a space to be wrong anymore. I really think that like social media actually has a huge impact on that. Like as I'm someone who I'm pretty active, like I used to be pretty active debating, and a lot of the times it would come down to social media, and I don't think that we realize as like a society how much social media has changed the way we function. Because social media, you only want to put up your best self. Like obviously everyone knows that. You only want to put your best self, your most amazing self, your successes. No one wants to see the dark parts. And I think that's created this overall culture where glamorization of your life is supposed to be the norm. And that's not. Like it's reason why it's called glamorization. Also, like I would say in general, that glamorization has affected like not just social media, but now it's like within our lives too. Like if we don't achieve this standard we see and what we surround ourselves by, then we aren't like we can't compare. We're worse, or we just come to these conclusions. Like maybe one big way we could tackle these issues is by like finally looking at like how much social media has one affected our appearances, but also number two affected literacy rates in the country. Like it's like insane, I think. Honestly, like look at the statistics. So maybe that's one way we can fight back on this like worry of being wrong.
Mhm. For sure. I think we're running out of time,
Yeah.
but like, thank you so much for meeting with me, Chelsea. This was really great. And I thought this was a really productive conversation. I reflected on a bunch of stuff, and I was like, wow, like we were cooking.
Yeah, we hope we were. Like,
So thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It couldn't have been possible without you. For our listeners, for more, follow us on Instagram at aster.lit. That's well, ASTER dot LIT, and check our website at asterlit.org for transcripts and more. Keep a lookout for our latest issue, releasing soon through the link in our description, and find this issue and this podcast on Aster's official website. So thank you once again, Chelsea. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you soon. Bye.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting. It was great being invited on here.